You may not have heard of the New Age movement. While some might be involved in its practices, there's a lot of people who don't go around just saying, hey, I'm a New Ager. But after this lesson, you're definitely going to begin to realize that the New Age movement has had an impact on our culture, and that we need to have answers to those who are involved in it. Today, what we're going to do as we critique the New Age movement is we are simply going to introduce this movement so that you can understand its key figures, its growing popularity, its associated practices, and realize the pull that this philosophy has had and is having on our generation. And we're going to close with a couple of Bible passages, but most of the biblical analysis is going to take place next week as we get more detailed in our Christian critique of this philosophy. And we equip ourselves to be ready to give an answer to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you. It's our job to defend the gospel. Sometimes you have to be aware of what those people are teaching who oppose the gospel in order to do that. So let's answer this question. What is this New Age movement? Begin by just quickly summarizing it. It's hard to do that. But the New Age movement doesn't claim a specific human founder. A lot of denominations kind of have a specific founder. You can't say that really about the New Age movement. But it traces its roots back to a diverse blend of ancient religions. There's a hint of Hinduism and a hint of Buddhism and a hint of Taoism and Gnosticism, which was a 2nd century heresy. John's probably already dealing with a little bit in the epistles of John and the scriptures. And it has certainly a touch of the occult in it. The New Age then, because it's very heavily influenced by these particular religious systems, it's not new, it's just really a repackaging of old beliefs. And I want to say this just from the start. I wonder if we're so focused on Middle Eastern influence right now, so focused in thinking about Islam, that we've forgotten about Eastern influences and the influence that the East has had upon the U.S. As we think about the New Age movement, though, there is no sacred creed, so I can't quote from any sacred creed of the New Agers. They have no centralized headquarters. They've got no formal clergy. There's no official website, though you can find a lot of websites that teach this philosophy. Seminars really replace sermons. Books replace any sacred text that there might be, and there's been a lot of books written. Informal groups really replace what we would have as religious services. And meditation and channeling replaces prayer. And so this is the religion of the New Age movement in many cases. It's a religion then, whether they're going to call it that or not. Just a couple of decades ago, New Age bookstore sections would have been labeled as a cult. They changed the name. They started to rebrand, naming the sections in the bookstores as a cult. And with that rebranding campaign, it's helped to normalize and increase a more mainstream interest in New Age philosophy. Don Rifkin, who's the assistant manager of Samuel Weiser, which is New York City's premier metaphysical and occult bookstore, here's what he said. He said, basically, the subject hasn't changed. The marketing terms have. What people were terming occult in the 1950s or mind expansion in the 1960s has been termed New Age in the 1980s. It's really just been rebranded. It was first popularized by Alice Bailey in the late 1800s, early 1900s, but I want you to see a few of the faces of the New Age movement. Here's a pretty one. Blavatsky, this is Helena Blavatsky. I'm just kidding, that wasn't nice. She was born in Ukraine and traveled through Russia, and she had German and French ancestors. And Blavatsky was an occultist. She was a spirit medium. She was also an author. She was the founder of the Theosophical Society in 18 75. Now, we're going to connect her to somebody that's pretty important in history in just a minute, so stay with me here. Here's how she defined theosophy, because you might be wondering, what is the Theosophical Society? She defined theosophy as the synthesis of science, philosophy, and religion, all those things wrapped up into one. She authored The Secret Doctrine in 1885 after she had lived in India after several years. Now, what type of religious influences do you think she had while she was in India? Some of the same ones that we talked about at the start of the lesson: Hinduism, Buddhism, things of that nature. Her works as a psychic and a spiritualist brought Eastern thought to Europe and to America. And it also had a well-documented influence on one of the world's most famous villains. That's Hitler. Here's what you may not realize about Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler, he needs no introduction, right? Killed millions of Jews, tried to practice ethnic cleansing. We're going to talk about that next week a lot more as to how he justified that with his religious and occult beliefs. But most may not realize how heavily influenced Hitler was by the occult. Now, entire books have been written on this subject, so you can go to your bookstore, your library, and read those books if you want the full lowdown on all that. But here's an example. When U.S. Army historians noted items from Hitler's library after he was defeated, and they got into his library in his bedroom and were able to catalog those things, they found his library filled with occultic books. Do you know what was beside Hitler's bedside? It was Helena Blavatsky's book, The Secret Doctrine, an occultic book. By 1941, did you also realize that when armies invaded Berlin, there were 1,000 Tibetans that were found in Berlin? Many of these people had been imported into Germany to try to spiritualize Germany with many of those Eastern mysticism ideas. Hitler was fascinated with yoga. He was fascinated with astrology and transcendent states of consciousness. It's pretty well documented as well that he tried to accelerate those states of consciousness with drugs. And he was a drug user in order to try to reach these higher states of consciousness. At age 29, Hitler claims to have heard a voice who had selected him to be Germany's Messiah. And of course, we know what happens after that. I'm going to throw a name out here that might hurt a few people's feelings, but the Beatles were heavily influenced by some of the Eastern mystics and spiritualists as well. In the 1960s, some of you who were alive in the 60s, I wasn't, but do you remember when the Beatles went to India to study under a Hindu guru? And the name of that guru was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And I hope I pronounced that right. But they studied, when they went there, transcendental meditation with him, because they too were trying to expand their consciousness. They were going there trying to become songwriters, to try to get away from the world, to try to meditate upon their music. They thought it was going to make them better musicians when they left. According to Deepak Chopra, and I'm quoting from him because he also claims to be friends with Maharishi, the stay ended abruptly due to some of the Beatles' drug use. And that was a no-no with Maharishi to some extent. Tensions were already on the rise. John Lennon was having a secret affair with Yoko Ono while he was over there. Maharishi was demanding as much as a 25% fee off of the Beatles' next record, since after all, he helped them reach this higher state of consciousness, and so he wanted a very large sum of the money that they would receive from their next record. A couple of the Beatles weren't too happy with that, so they left. The Beatles brought more, though, to American culture than just music when they made that trip there. And from this time, there was a surge in interest in meditation, in yoga, in Eastern philosophy. Just like we use popular musicians and athletes and people like that to campaign and to market certain items. When they had their picture taken over in India with the Maharishi, people just suddenly got interested in it, started studying, and we see a growth in these mystic religions after the Beatles went and did this. Well, let's look at a couple more faces that you might be familiar with so that we understand some of the other people who influenced the New Age movement. One of those is Shirley MacLaine. Shirley MacLaine is an award-winning actress and author, been in a whole bunch of movies. She popularized the New Age movement in her books. She wrote a book called Out on a Limb in 1983, and Dancing in the Light was a book that followed that. And her New Age beliefs have made their way into several films. There was a miniseries that was based on her book, Out on a Limb. There was another film, Defending Your Life, Postcards from the Edge, These Old Broads. All of these have New Age philosophy and New Age ideas, and that's why Shirley MacLaine wanted to star in some of these. It was pushing her agenda. It was pushing her religious beliefs. We're going to talk about all of these characters in some way or another, if not today, next week, so that you can see their beliefs and what it is they're teaching. But we're just introducing them. But she's really been the most popular face of the New Age movement for several decades. A lot of people recognize her as being a believer in New Age philosophy. Here's somebody, I don't know if you've seen her or not. She's been on some talk shows and such. But this is an author and a mystic who claims to channel an ancient Lemurian warrior named Ramtha. Her real name is J.Z. Knight. Actually, that's not even her real name. That's a substitute name for her real name. But the person that she channels is someone named Ramtha. In other words, she claims that Ramtha, this ancient warrior who has died, speaks through her when she reaches this higher self, this higher state of consciousness. She acts as a medium for this person who has died, who speaks through her voice. She runs Ramtha's School of Enlightenment. By the way, she's doing very well with it. She lives in a 12,800 square foot French chateau style home next door to her school, and she's donated over $1 million to scholarships and charities. The point I'm simply trying to make with this is these people, a lot of them are making really good money doing this as well. She's been married 3 times. She's authored several books as well. In 2008, though, Time magazine called her probably the most celebrated of all current channelers. She's one of the most popular channelers. We'll get into what channeling is in just a minute. Here's a picture that if the last couple weren't familiar to you, this probably is, unless you've lived under a rock for a while. But Oprah Winfrey's the host of her own self-titled show, which has since gone off the air. She's openly promoted 2 books with New Age thinking. She's promoted a lot more than that with New Age, but here's 2 specifically I want you to be aware of. She's promoted The Secret, which is by Rhonda Burns, which, by the way, Joel Osteen seems to heavily borrow from in one of his books. I'm not even going to go there all the way, but I'm just going to say that it's a little scary that there might be some preachers out there today who have also been heavily influenced by New Age thinking. She openly promotes a lot of New Age ideas. These are things Oprah Winfrey has said. I believe God is in all things. And we're going to get into the doctrine of the teaching of pantheism, which is really what that is, that God is everywhere. God is in the rocks and the trees and the flowers and the birds, and He's in our body, He's in our cells. God is everything. God is everywhere. That's what Oprah believes. This is what she's also said openly, and you can go fact check it on the internet if you want. One of the mistakes that human beings make is believing that there is only one way. There are many paths to what you call God. Oprah's a big believer in New Age thinking. Here's one of the guys that she was advertising, a man named Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart Tolle Was born in Germany. He now lives in Vancouver, Canada. You can attend some of his seminars as well for a very high fee. He wrote 2 books with New Age thinking. He sold over 3 million and 5 million copies of these books. One of those is A New Earth, which, Oprah Winfrey, you guys have seen the Oprah Winfrey show, right? Oprah Winfrey had a book club, right? Every time Oprah Winfrey throws a book out on her book club, people go buy it, right? And Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth, was one of those books that she advertised on her book club. And so she's made him pretty popular. It's reached the #1 bestseller several times. He also wrote a book called The Power of Now. In 2008, you may never heard of him, but apparently Time Magazine has. They called him the most popular spiritual author in the United States. We're all worried about all these other authors and these television evangelists who are preaching a pretty fluffy gospel sometimes, but the most popular spiritual author in the United States might just be somebody you haven't even heard of, Eckhart Tolle. The Watkins Review labeled him as #1 out of 100 in a list of the most spiritually influential living people. So whether you're aware of him or not, you should be aware of what he's teaching because he's got influence. And there are people who are buying his books and buying into his philosophy. His appearances on and with Oprah have helped as well. And here's the last one, probably one of the more recent New Age faces, is Deepak Chopra. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, as I really don't know. What? Chopra. Thank you, Joe. And he's an Indian-American author and public speaker. And again, because he's Indian-American, you can see why there'd be some of those influences from some of the religions that we mentioned earlier. But he gained popularity in the 1990s after appearances on the Oprah Winfrey Show. I wonder why she keeps having people like Chopra and Eckhart Tolle and others on her show, because those are her beliefs, right? He's been a #1 best-selling author. His books have been translated into 43 languages. Okay, so this isn't somebody to take lightly, as if nobody reads him. People are reading him a lot. 2 of his most popular New Age books include The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success. He's got another book on how to know God. According to a 2008 Time article, his overall yearly profit exceeds $15 million. This guy is making money. Go to his website and you're going to see why he's making money. He charges a lot of money to go and attend his retreats and his seminars and to buy his books and DVDs. This is a popular movement. Okay? People are reading these people, studying these people, they're involved in it. Marilyn Ferguson, who's a New Ager, was quoted as saying this, so that you can kind of see the popularity of it. Sociologists at UC Santa Barbara estimate that as many as 12 million Americans could be considered active participants in the New Age movement. Another 30 million are avidly interested. If all these people were brought together in a church-like organization, it would be the 3rd largest religious denomination in America. That was in 1993. It's grown a lot since then. Millions of Americans have adopted New Age beliefs, too. For example, New Agers believe in reincarnation. 25% of Americans, you realize 1 out of 4 Americans believe in reincarnation? 25%. 42% say they've been in contact with someone who has died. You might think that's crazy, but 4 out of 10 people you look at think that that's real. 15% endorse the work of spirit mediums or channelers. 15%. 67% read astrology columns. You guys read your horoscopes? Good for you. But a lot of people do. It's one of the most popular parts of the newspaper. 3 out of 10 teens have played the Ouija board and had their palms read. These are things connected to the occult, connected to the New Age movement. This is a popular movement. I want to think with you about some of the practices of the movement. Maybe these faces don't make a lot of sense to you. Maybe some of these doctrines are not totally familiar, but I think some of these practices should be pretty obviously familiar to you. And one of those practices of New Agers is the practice of meditation. Edgar Cayce, who wrote a book on channeling your higher self. So this is, again, a kind of a self-help book on how to reach your higher self. He said, meditation is listening to the divine within. There's a purpose behind meditation. Now, when we teach and preach meditation, of course, we teach that you need to be meditating on the Word of God. That's what Psalm chapter 1 says, that we should be meditating on the law of God night and day. We should be thinking about it. Meditation to them is not meditating on the Word of God. That's not the purpose of it. And here's the best explanation that I can give you briefly. And again, this is New Age 101, okay? But this is the best explanation I can give you on the purpose of meditation and the New Age mentality and what it's trying to accomplish. New Agers believe each man has an ego. And here's what they mean by ego. This ego is something that's been formed by tradition and culture and society, and it's caused us to not really be our true selves. It's our ego. It's the front that we put on for other people to see, essentially. But it keeps us from getting to know, our ego keeps us from getting to know our inner God and our higher self. Your ego is not who you are. There's actually someone higher than that inside of you. The goal then is for us to get rid of that ego so we can start listening to that inner voice, that higher self, and stop listening to our ego because it's been shaped by culture, tradition, parentage, society, our own selfish desires, to listen to our higher self. And when we do that, we can truly live as gods. Okay? And that takes meditation. It takes focus. It takes concentration. There are practices that are often used to try and get rid of that ego and get more focused on the inner God, the higher self. Books have been written to help people get there. Seminars are conducted. Did you know that over 20% of Fortune 500 companies use retreats and seminars to try and help their workers get along and be more productive with New Age philosophy and thinking? This type of psychological training is taking place with athletes. The idea of becoming one with the ball. Some of that is rooted in this. These are things that Deepak Chopra teaches in his books. There are tons of self-help books and websites and gurus who promise to be able to help you, and meditation is one of the key practices of the New Age movement. This is Oprah and Deepak. This is on their website. Become what you believe. It's one of the things that they're advertising. And if you want to become what you believe, you can just buy that DVD for $49.99 so that you can become it. But become what you believe. It's a 21-day meditation experience to help you become that. You can purchase that. Again, the purpose of this meditation is to help get rid of your ego and find your higher self, to become what you really truly are, what you believe. Yoga is another form of meditation, though, that's used by New Age philosophers. And I think it's important for us to realize as Christians that yoga has some pretty serious connections to the occult and to these types of religions. Here's a quote from yoga.com. Does it get more official than that? Yoga.com. On the mat, the serious yoga practitioner is the embodiment of focus, discipline, and unwavering concentration. He or she is devoted to the perfection of the asana poses, and he or she challenges mind and body to achieve a higher state of being. Isn't that what I was just talking about? Why is yoga encouraged as a practice by New Agers? Sure, this sounds legitimate and rather impressive, but what does it really mean to achieve your higher state of being? What is the ultimate goal of yoga, they ask? Well, this is a complicated question. There must be a grand design, an ultimate goal, and there is. It is called moksha. Moksha is the liberation from worldly suffering and samsara. That's the cycle of birth and death through reincarnation. Did you realize when you were taking yoga what you were really doing? And I'm not saying everybody who takes it. Some of you, I know some of you just do it for exercise, but there's a lot of people, they're very serious about this is what they're doing. Moksha is the liberation from worldly suffering and samsara. This release from sequential lives on earth. That's what happens. You had some bad previous lives and you need to sweat it all out in yoga, y'all. Let it go. According to this release from sequential lives on earth leads to an enlightened relationship with a creator. According to Hindu monist schools such as Shaivism, Jainism, at the point of moksha, there is a realization of identity with the Supreme Brahman. And when you really get deep into a pose and you really meditate and you really just kind of find your higher self, you are one with the Supreme Being. For Bhakti schools of Vaishnavism, I am butchering probably the pronunciations of so many of these words, and so I apologize, but the realization of identity is made with Vishnu. Do you think that this view towards yoga is only for a handful of people? You might, most people, that's not really what they believe when they're practicing yoga. This is an excerpt from the New York Daily News. It says, more than 11,000 yoga fanatics got their downward dog on at the crossroads of the world on Saturday. This was earlier this summer. The yogis unrolled their mats in Times Square, stretching the sun to commemorate the summer solstice. Why were they doing that? Why were 11,000 people at Times Square? Because it's the longest day of the year, and in the yoga tradition, this is the day you worship the sun, said the 25-year-old yoga instructor from Wayne, New Jersey. And here's a picture. They do this every year now in Times Square. It's only a handful of crazy people who do this, right? 11,000 people worshiping the sun, downtown New York. Meditation. Yoga is practiced with meditation. Some New Agers, because they're trying to reach this higher state of consciousness, will use drugs to try to get to that point. Just like we mentioned, Hitler tried to do that as well. And so the drugs can be, but are not necessarily a part of New Age practices. Well, what are some other things connected to the New Age movement? Well, divination practices. A lot of New Agers practice some of these things. They're interested in tarot cards. They're interested in rune stones and palmistry. They go and get their palms read so they can determine things about their life. They use Ouija boards. They use amulets, charms. You've heard of charm bracelets, by the way? Do you realize the origins of charm bracelets? Now some of you are thinking, oh, I'm going to take my charm bracelet off. Do you realize the origins of some of these charm bracelets? Talismans, psychic readings. These are all practices that are common in the New Age movement and with the occult. Divination practices, astrology, something that New Agers are very interested in. They're interested in reading the horoscopes. This is according to a Harris poll in 2009, 26% of Americans believe in astrology. Believe. 1 out of every 4 people you see believes their horoscope, believes in astrology. This is another quotation from the United Kingdom, Britain. Most women in the UK consider their sign fits their personality, is what it says. Research conducted amongst a sample of students in England found that 100% know their star sign. 70% read their horoscopes regularly. 85% agree that the description of their birth sign describes their personality. People are heavily influenced by horoscopes and the astrological signs. This is astrologer Susan Miller, says that the people who check their horoscopes are more educated than anyone expects. These educated people are involved in this stuff. Her site, Astrology Zone, gets 6 million unique visitors a month. 6 million to check their horoscopes. Here's a breakdown of who checks her site. The audience is predominantly female. You notice that there's twice as many females as males on the site. And it breaks it down even more than that. You know, one of the songs that made astrology kind of popular was a song by the Fifth Dimension. I think it's also sung in the Hair musical, which is pretty raunchy. But Fifth Dimension, these are the words. When the moon is in the... I mean, tell me you haven't sung along with this song, too. What a ridiculous song. When the moon is in the 7th house and Jupiter aligns with Mars, then peace will guide the planets and love will steer the stars. This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. It's all about astrology, though, and the horoscopes. Harmony and understanding, sympathy and trust abounding, no more falsehoods or derisions, golden living dreams of visions, mystic crystal, we're going to get to the crystals in a minute, revelation and the mind's true liberation. Let the sun shine, and by the way, it repeats that over and over and over and over again. It's kind of like a chant, trying to get ourselves up into that higher self. It's one of the ways we do it. This was what helped made some of astrology popular and has normalized and mainstreamed it in our culture. Trance-channeling, we mentioned earlier, and mediums are also one of the practices of the New Age movement. Here's how it's defined. We're just going to look at some definitions for a minute. What is mediumship? Mediumship is the practice of certain people who are known as mediums to purportedly mediate communication between spirits of the dead and living human beings. That's what a medium does. So we want to communicate with someone who's died. How do we do that? You know, maybe it's a past relative. We want to talk to them. Well, how do we bring them back up? We know we can't talk to them. Well, we can use a medium. At least that's what a lot of people believe. We can speak through a medium or a trance channel, or maybe they can bring up this past human being for us. Attempts to contact the dead. By the way, this happened in the Bible, right? King Saul. While King Saul was pretty evil and wicked in a lot of ways, it was his last-ditch act of desperation where he calls up the medium and he wants to talk to Samuel. Samuel says, what'd you bring me back up here for? And King Saul dies after that. But attempts to contact the dead date back to early human history, with mediumship gaining in popularity during the 19th century. It goes a lot along with the Alice Bailey we mentioned earlier, Helena Blavatsky. They started to popularize these practices again. Investigations during this period revealed widespread fraud. Some practitioners were employing techniques used by stage magicians. No. And the practice started to lose credibility. The practice still continues into the 21st century with high-profile fraud uncovered as recently as the 2000s. Here's the definition of trance channeling. When someone is a trance channeler, what are they doing? Well, the other incarnation of non-physical mediumship is a form of channeling in which the channeler goes into a trance. So they reach this higher state. Sometimes it's brought on by hypnosis, or there's just a lot of different ways. But they go into a trance, they essentially leave their body, and they allow a spiritual entity to borrow their body, who then talks through them. J.Z. Knight, we mentioned earlier, is Ramtha. That's what she does. She leaves her body, and she allows this Lemurian warrior to speak through her. And the Lemurian warrior tells her all kinds of mysteries of the gods. She writes books, and people buy them. And she buys 13,000 square foot homes. Thank you. Here's some more about trance channeling. This is from Soul Evolution. I just want to mention, notice the name of that website? Soul Evolution. People who believe in the New Age are often heavy believers in evolution. They also believe that our soul evolves. Some of the ancient ideas about reincarnation is you could be reincarnated into a fly and into an animal. Most people in New Age philosophy don't believe that. They believe that you are reincarnated, when you choose to be reincarnated, into another human being, and you're always going to be reincarnated to your higher in a better self. In other words, our soul is evolving and we're getting better, even our souls. But this is what they write. There are different ways to channel or to receive messages from beings that exist in other frequencies or dimensions. And trance channeling is one of the most complex and intense ways to receive such information. There are different levels of trance channeling as well, ranging from a light trance to a deep full trance. In a deep trance, the channeler or medium is unconscious. The being that incorporates into the medium's body has full control and use over their body. I will use the terms channeler and medium here interchangeably. In true trance channeling, the channeler goes into a deeper state of consciousness to directly channel beings who exist in other dimensional frequencies. The being blends with the energetic field of the medium using the physical system of the medium, including their larynx, their vocal cords, their voice box, their diaphragm, and possibly other body areas as well, like their fingers, arms, legs, head, and neck as well. And by the way, you can watch Katie on YouTube, Trance Channel, because she channels Aristotle. Haven't you ever wanted to listen to Aristotle in real life? Well, if you just go listen to Katie, she will channel and bring Aristotle back to life. That's what she claims to be able to do. She's very proud of that. Last thing, and there are other trance channelers as well. Some claim that they brought back Lazarus. Kevin Ryerson's a popular one, claims to. John claims to work through a man named Kevin Ryerson. Here's the last practice that's pretty familiar with New Age, the New Age movement, some of this. And that's holistic health. Acupuncture finds its roots with many of these ideas that we see being used in the New Age movement, and acupuncture is growing in popularity, and part of that may very well be due to the influence, the Asian influence upon our culture. But acupuncture is one of the main forms of treatment in traditional Chinese medicine. It involves the use of sharp, thin needles. Now, we already know that, right? We put little needles in the body at certain specific points. Now, why is this done? Where did this practice originate? This process is believed to adjust and alter the body's energy flow to healthier patterns. And it's used to treat a wide variety of illnesses and health conditions. Now again, I'm not saying maybe acupuncture is good for some things. There are some medical journals that would mention that maybe that's it. But you need to realize that there's also some religious reasons why people use acupuncture and the origins of it. And there are some ways that it's used that don't seem to be consistent with Scripture. The original text of Chinese medicine is the I Ching, the Yellow Emperor's classic of internal medicine. It's estimated to be at least 2,500 years old. Thousands of books since then have been written on the subject of Chinese healing, and its basic philosophy spread long ago to other Asian civilizations. Nearly all the forms of Oriental medicine which are used in the West today, including acupuncture, shiatsu, acupressure, massage, and macrobiotics, are part or have their roots in Chinese medicine. Now, let's think about what some of those roots are. What did the Chinese believe when they were practicing this? Chinese medicine views the body as a small part of the universe and subject to universal laws and principles of harmony and balance. Chinese use ideas like yin and yang, qi, the organ system, the 5 elements to describe health and the body. To understand the ideas behind acupuncture, it's worthwhile to introduce some of these basic terms, yin and yang. According to Chinese philosophy, the universe and the body can be described by 2 separate but complementary principles, that of yin and yang. For example, in temperature, yin is cold, yang is hot. In gender, yin is female, yang is male. In activity, yin is passive, yang is active. In light, yin is dark, yang is bright. In direction, yin is inward and downward, and yang is outward and up. Nothing is ever completely yin or yang, but a combination of the two. These 2 principles are always interacting, opposing, and influencing each other. Acupuncture therapy seek to either increase or reduce yang, or increase or reduce yin in particular regions of the body. Okay, you guys have seen the yin and yang symbols used, right? These are symbols that have their roots in the false religions of China and are now popular in our country today. Another reason acupuncture is used because of qi. Another fundamental concept of Chinese medicine is that of qi. Qi is the fundamental life energy of the universe. When they put those little needles in you, they are controlling the life energy of the universe and helping it run more smoothly through your body, supposedly. It is invisible. It's found in the environment, in the air, the water, food, and sunlight, in the body. It is the invisible vital force that creates and animates life. They are trying to adjust your yin and yang and help your qi with acupuncture. Okay? That's what's happening. Stuff finds its roots in Eastern religions. Here's another one that's used as well, crystals, crystal balls. These are getting to be pretty popular. There are a lot of holistic health places that claim that they can use crystals to try to help you in different ways. Here's another quotation that traditional occult practices, tarot reading, astrology, yoga, meditation, and mediumship, they were integrated into the movement as tools to assist personal transformation. We're going to skip over some of that. The movement also spoke to the sick and psychologically wounded. We're talking about the New Age movement, especially those who had been able to find help through traditional medicine and psychotherapy, aligning themselves with the holistic health movement, which advocated alternative and natural healing practices such as massage, natural food diets, chiropractic, and acupuncture. Believers in the New Age promoted spiritual healing, and they sought the integration of older divinatory practices. Astrology, tarot, I Ching, with standard psychological counseling. In addition to that, two transformative tools, this is from Britannica.com, it's from the encyclopedia, two transformative tools, channeling and the use of crystals, were identified with the New Age movement as it peaked in the 1980s. Many New Agers discovered their psychic abilities and became known as channels. So either consciously or in a trance, they claimed to establish contact with various preternatural or extraterrestrial entities who spoke through them on a wide range of spiritual, philosophical, and psychological topics. Some of the beings who spoke through channels were Seth, Ramtha, and Lazarus. They've become popular teachers themselves, some of the more popular channelers founded new organizations. Drawing upon the myth of Atlantis, one channeler, Frank Alpert, proposed the use of crystals. Okay, so here's the person who first proposed using crystals was a trance channeler as healing transformative tools. He suggested that the ancient civilization had lived off the power of crystals and fell because of its rulers' unwise and immoral use of them. Somebody watched Superman a little too much. Believes in kryptonite. Crystals were thought to be great reservoirs of energy and distinct healing and of transformative powers that could be released for personal benefit. In the 1980s, they were among the most popular items at New Age stores and conventions. However, critics were quick to point out the unscientific nature of the movement's claims for crystals. The use of crystals by holistic health places. And there are some of those here. Sell crystals. They sell rocks like that. Here's an example. For example, here's these rocks are all supposed to help stress, but depending upon your astrological sign, you might use one or the other. But here's blue spinel. It restores Aries enthusiasm when they experience setbacks. So just use a little bit of that crystal, and it's going to help you be more enthusiastic. I guess I'm a Taurus. My birthday's in May. So we'll have to tell my wife to buy some blue lace agate. It offers Taurus clarity when things don't make sense. Okay, so when things are confusing, I should have had some before I preached, because sometimes I'm a little confused. So you can see all of these have a different reason. It allows Geminis to move past obsessive behaviors. So you use this particular crystal and this particular rock for this particular purpose. Stilbite guides cancer when they feel it drift. Some of these I should be carrying around in my pocket all day, all the time. I'm just kidding. One more thing, and it's the practice of Reiki massage. Now, my wife is a certified massage therapist, as most of you know, and you can get a little personal information from her about when she was first taught about Reiki massage. She does not use that in her practices because she believes it to be a bunch of baloney. And that's why I like her. But Reiki massage, it's a Japanese technique for stress reduction and relaxation that also promotes healing. It's administered by laying on hands. It's based on the idea that an unseen life force energy flows through us and is what causes us to be alive. If one's life force energy is low, then we are more likely to get sick or feel stress. And if it's high, we're more capable of being happy and healthy. The word Reiki is made of two Japanese words. Here's what Reiki is. Rei, which means God's wisdom or the higher power, and Ki, which is life force energy. When you're practicing Reiki massage, you're calling upon God's life force energy to help you. So Reiki is actually spiritually guided life force energy. It's a spiritual type of massage. It's an amazingly simple technique to learn, according to Reiki.org. The ability to use Reiki is not taught in the usual sense. It's transferred to the student during a Reiki class. It's not taught, it's transferred to you. Passing life force on to another. By the way, George Lucas was heavily influenced by New Age thinking. For those of you who have seen Star Wars lately, you know, the Force and all that. It's transferred to the student during a Reiki class. It's passed on during attunement given by a Reiki master and allows the student to tap into an unlimited supply of life force energy to improve one's health and enhance the quality of life. Its use is not dependent on one's intellectual capacity or spiritual development. Therefore, it's available to everybody. It's been successfully taught to thousands of people of all ages and backgrounds. While Reiki is spiritual in nature, it's not a religion. Reiki is not a religion, but it's still important to live and act in a way that promotes harmony with others, according to the Reiki site. Here's what you need to do. In order for the Reiki healing energies to have lasting results, the client must accept responsibility for her or his healing and take an active part in it. And therefore, the Usui system of Reiki is more than the use of Reiki energy. It must also include an active commitment to improve oneself in order for it to be a complete system. The ideals are both guidelines for living a gracious life and virtues worthy of practice for their inherent value. All this stuff, all these things that we mentioned, these practices, these are all common among New Agers. Now, I also use psychics. I don't think I have to get into this very much, but New Age ideas have continued through a variety of groups, including the Freemasons and the teachings of Helena Blavatsky. And New Age ideas have many different origins. We've already mentioned this, but some of their origins are from Hinduism, Buddhism, other ancient religious traditions. This is just confirming what I've already said. New Age groups are often distinguished by their occult practices of psychic readings, tarot cards, yoga, meditation strategies, and astrology. And many New Age groups also believe in various natural healing practices and traditional medicines, including acupuncture, herbal therapy, natural food, spiritual healing. Even though there is no standard doctrine within the New Age movement, many of their teachings focus on individual autonomy, relativism, and spiritualism. Guys familiar with some of those practices? Shake or nod. Yeah. I'm familiar with those. Now, do you want to be associated? This means someone who is a believer in New Age philosophy and thinking. When it's connected so heavily to the occult, it's things of that nature. Why is this so popular? Some of you, I've wondered this myself. Why is this so popular? Why did 1 in 4 people believe in reincarnation? Why did 3 out of 4 people read their horoscope and believe in it? Why? Why are people trying to fall into a trance so they can channel and pull up dead people? And I think here's a few reasons. For one, because atheism for a lot of people isn't working. It still doesn't satisfy the soul's yearnings. To say there is no God, that's pretty negative. If there's no God, some people wonder, why do I still have this spiritual entity about me? And so the opposite of there is no God is God is everywhere. But it really leads to the same results. Dostoevsky once said, if there is no God, then everything is permitted. Well, if God is everything, then everything is permitted too. So it helps fill an empty void. And I think there are people who want to be considered and viewed as spiritual, who have fallen into this movement. It also appeals to a humanistic culture. If we find our inner God, well, the whole goal of finding your higher self is basically to find your inner God. And what a wonderful thing to realize that you were God all along. It's humanism. Humanism is where we're the God, and nobody's going to tell us what to do. And this is the whole point. Get rid of your ego. Get rid of what your parents taught you about God. Get rid of what society thinks about God, what our culture thinks about God. Dump all that out of your life and think about what you, deep down, really want and desire and crave, because you can have it, because you are your own God. It meshes nicely in an age of relativism as well. I mean, we live in a world that is very relative. We don't believe in objective truth. People are rejecting the Bible. They're rejecting Jesus Christ. We could talk a lot about what New Agers believe about Jesus. They believe that he was a great guru and a spiritual master, but certainly not the Son of God, not the Savior of the world, because there is no such thing as sin. Because you can do whatever you want. You're your own God. And if things are bad in this life, you'll get reincarnated to a better life later. It meshes nicely in an age of relativism. There's no rules here. There's no Savior. There's no Lord telling you what to do. Life's just one big adventure, and you just go from one adventure to another. And to some people, that's very appealing. It offers an optimistic future too. New Agers believe in reincarnation. They believe in the evolution of the soul. They've redefined reincarnation. You know, it's kind of sad to think that I could turn into a fly and my lifespan would be only a very short time, a few days. But with this view of reincarnation, I will evolve into maybe a princess or a queen. Or king. I mean, I guess I could be a queen. Nothing's said about switching genders. It's just you can't switch to a lower animal form. New Agers believe in reincarnation. Things always get better, so this is optimistic. They like the optimism of that. You know, it's not, well, you're dead, and that's it. Again, it's a nice alternative to atheism where you're dead and you die and you're just like the worms, and that's it. Sorry. There's something positive that we can think about after this life. And it's a reflection, I want to say this, that Christianity's failing. We're not doing a good enough job grounding people in the objective faith of Jesus Christ, and maybe that's one of the big reasons that this religion is growing so profusely. We need to do a better job. A lot of churches are not doing a very good job. They're too busy trying to appeal to people with cupcakes and ice cream and gymnasiums and recreation, and not interested enough in telling people that they're in sin, and Jesus came to this earth to die for their sins. And Jesus was raised from the dead. That's a simple fact proven by eyewitnesses to give them hope of an eternal life after this one is over. We need to do a better job of getting those facts out, that message. That's part of the pool. We're going to close with 3 passages. Next week there's going to be a lot more, but I want to make sure I throw a couple passages in here just to point out this. First, Genesis chapter 3. Genesis chapter 3. Do you realize that the New Age movement and what it offers, the idea that you can be your own God, that is very much the same as the first temptation that Satan offered to Eve? What was the first temptation? In Genesis chapter 3, again, I say this to say this isn't something new. This is something that's very, very old and that still is appealing. Genesis chapter 3, the woman said to the serpent, we can eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden. God has said you can't eat it, nor can you touch it, or you will die. And the serpent said, you will not surely die. God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And that appealed to Eve. And she ate it, and she gave some to Adam too. The idea that we can be like God. We don't have to listen to God telling us we can't eat of that tree. It appeals to people to be their own God. And yet that was the first sin. The first temptation. And it's what we're supposed to be trying to avoid. We are not our own gods. We have a creator. And we need to submit to that creator. I want to just notice quickly with you, since we've noticed all of these practices, what the law of Moses said about many of these practices to make it extremely clear that God was never very pleased with the occult and with divination and with mediums and with soothsaying and with sorcery. In Deuteronomy chapter 18 and verse 9, it says, when you come into the land which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominations of those nations. And I'm afraid in our country where we pride ourselves on being the melting pot of America that we have begun to participate in a lot of the abominations of other nations. And we pride ourselves in many cases in that. But that wasn't to be the case with Israel, and it shouldn't be the case with us. It says, verse 10, there shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, or one who practices witchcraft, or a soothsayer, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who conjures spells, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. All who do these things are an abomination to the Lord, and because of these abominations, the Lord your God drives them out from before you. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God. Do you know how many Christians I've heard quote passages in the Old Testament that talks about how homosexuality is an abomination, and yet some of those same Christians will participate in palm reading, and astrology, and divination, and those practices that are just as much an abomination and sin as homosexuality was under the old law? Be careful you're not pointing your finger at someone when you've got fingers pointing back at you. It's just as wrong. Leviticus 19, 26 and 31 mentions it as well. Now, to be clear, it's important for us to realize that this isn't just an Old Testament thing, and we've gone beyond that. It was a sin in the New Testament as well. In Acts chapter 8, Philip goes and he preaches to a little city. Not a little city, this is a pretty good sized city, Samaria. In Acts chapter 8 and verse 9, it says that he was 3 days, I'm in chapter 9, chapter 8 verse 9. There was a certain man called Simon who previously practiced sorcery in the city. It says, he astonished the people of Samaria, claiming that he was someone great. That's exactly what people are doing. Kevin Ryerson, Ramtha, Deepak Chopra, Eckhart Tolle. They're paying tons of money so they can just listen to a few words, a few lectures, a few bits of pieces of advice from these people. Maybe they'll call up a spirit from the dead. Maybe they'll get them into a trance. Maybe they'll help them reach their higher self. They believe that these are great people. Simon had that reputation. He was practicing sorcery. And he claimed that he was someone great, and they all gave heed. This is what people believed about him. They said, this man is the great power of God, and they heeded him because he had astonished them with his sorceries for a long time. Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown says of Simon that he was viewed as the great power of God. In other words, people viewed him as some sort of incarnation or divinity. Thayer's refers to Simon's sorceries and says the term sorcery refers also to magic and magic arts. Sometimes the word sorcery refers to drug-induced magic arts. People think you're great because he's getting them high. It's from the Greek word pharmakon. It's where we get our word pharmacy. What do pharmacies sell? Drugs. Sorcery was using sometimes drugs and magical arts to impress people. Could it be that many of those high-paid masters and gurus of today who claim to be able to tap into our higher self or our inner God, or claim to have the power to harness our spiritual energy, are nothing? They're phony charlatans like Simon. They are deceiving spirits who are helping us fill a void for a fake spirituality while they're making tons of money off of us. Simon was making money. He was making bank. That's why when he saw the real miracles that Peter and John performed, he said, I will give you money to be able to have the power to some of that. And Peter and John said, your heart is not right because you're greedy. You want to be considered somebody. And he needed to humble himself. Even Simon, though, and here's what I want you to see. When Simon saw the miracles that Philip and Peter and John performed, even Simon believed, and when he was baptized, it says he continued with Philip. He was amazed seeing the miracles and signs which were done. When we compare the miracles of the Bible to the stuff that's going on in these types of movements, there's no comparison. One can be faked. The other is real. That could be seen in the city of Samaria, and that's why people quit believing in Simon and started believing in the preaching of Philip, because they could tell he was legit. In Acts chapter 19, idol worship, practice of sorcery and magic, it was so common in the pagan world. In Acts chapter 19, what did the people do who had converted to Christ in Ephesus? Well, verse 18 says, many who had believed, they believed in the preaching of Paul. They came confessing and telling their deeds. Verse 19, many of those who had practiced magic brought their books together, burned them in the sight of all, and they counted up the value of them. It totaled 50,000 pieces of silver. And the word of the Lord grew mightily and prevailed. What do I do if I've been involved in these types of practices? Well, I would suggest you need to do the same thing that the early Christians in Ephesus did. You need to take your books, you need to take your potions, you need to take your crystals, and you need to burn them and get rid of them. Your Ouija boards. You need to turn from it. That's what they had to do. Why do we think that we can go back into it? That was something that needed to be repented of, turned away from in the first century. And we need to turn away from it today. Galatians 5:20 calls one of the works of the flesh sorceries. The work of the flesh. Sorcery was exposed, it was rebuked in the first century church. I'm all out of time. Next week, we're going to start taking a look at some of the specific statements which have been made by the New Agers, and we're going to contrast their philosophies with the philosophies of the Bible. This is only part one, but it's our hope that you've now got a better understanding of how far-reaching this movement truly is. It's not to be ignored, and more importantly, by only looking at a few passages, hope that you can see how God was not unaware of practices and philosophies such as these. He's known about it from the first man and woman, and he's been calling people to repent ever since. He's calling you to repent now of your associations with occult practices and deceiving spirits as you recognize God as the ultimate creator and ruler of this life. And if you need to do that, you come forward while we stand and while we sing.